In a drawer in countless American kitchens, there used to be a notebook. Not a budgeting app, not a spreadsheet, just a notebook. Sometimes a coffee can. Sometimes the blank pages at the back of a calendar from the local hardware store, where a parent or a grandparent kept a running list of what came in and what went out. The striking thing about those notebooks, looking back at them now, is not how careful they were. It is how short the lists were. A mortgage payment, a car payment, groceries, and at the bottom, almost always, something left over. That kind of notebook has mostly disappeared from American homes. Not because people stopped caring about their money, but because the math underneath it changed so completely that the old kind of accounting no longer makes sense. What follows are 12 things that, for most of the 20th century, an ordinary working family could expect to afford simply by showing up and doing their job. Today, each one requires something closer to a financial strategy, and sometimes a small miracle. The order in which they appear says something on its own, because the list does not end with the smallest disappointment. It ends with the one that used to be the whole point. Number 12 is a starter home, the kind of modest first house that used to function as a launching pad rather than a lifelong dream. According to the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard, the national median single-family home price climbed to roughly 5 times the median household income in 2024, nearing the highest ratio on record, compared with about 3 times income through most of the 1990s. The National Association of Realtors put the median U.S. home price at around $420,000 last year against a median household income of roughly $83,700, meaning prices have grown more than 6 times over since 1980, while incomes grew less than 5 times over the same stretch. The geography of that gap is uneven in a telling way. In San Jose, homes now sell for more than 12 times the median local income, the highest ratio ever recorded in a large American market. While in Pittsburgh, the median home still sits near $237,000. A reminder that the housing crisis is not one national story, but dozens of regional ones layered on top of each other. A young teacher or electrician in Denver or Las Vegas, markets where the price-to-income ratio has pushed past 6, is not failing at adulthood by renting into their 30s. They are responding rationally to a market where the starter home, the modest 3-bedroom that a single income once bought without much drama, has quietly become a luxury good in much of the country. Number 11 is a new car bought without dread. Cars used to be the most ordinary purchase a working household made, financed simply and paid off in a few years. That has changed in ways that are easy to overlook because the sticker shock arrives slowly, one loan term at a time. Kelley Blue Book has tracked the average new vehicle transaction price above $50,000 for 12 straight months. And Edmunds reports the average amount financed for a new car hit a record near $44,000 in early 2026. To manage the monthly bill, more than 1 in 5 new car loans in the most recent quarter ran 84 months or longer, nearly 7 years, up from about 1 in 10 loans a decade ago, according to Edmunds. A record share of new car buyers, just over 1 in 5, are now committing to payments of $1,000 a month or more. Cox Automotive data shows the share of new car buyers earning under $100,000 a year has fallen from half of all buyers in 2020 to roughly a third today. Not because fewer modest earners want cars, but because fewer of them can still clear the bar. A car that used to be a 4-year commitment is now, for a growing number of American households, a 7-year one, financed at interest rates that can add over $10,000 to the total cost of a single vehicle. Number 10 is having children without it reshaping your entire financial life. LendingTree's 2026 analysis put the cost of raising a child from birth through age 18 at just over $303,000. The first time the figure has crossed that threshold since the firm began tracking it in 2023, and a rise of nearly 30% in only 3 years. That works out to almost $16,900 a year, not counting college. In Hawaii, the most expensive state in the analysis, The 18-year total tops $412,000. In a LendingTree survey, 82% of parents said raising children has gotten noticeably more expensive in the last year alone, and 44% said financial strain is the direct reason they have fewer children than they originally wanted. This is not abstract belt-tightening. It is showing up in the most basic decisions families make about their own size and shape. Number 9 is childcare that does not consume an entire paycheck. The federal government defines affordable childcare as costing no more than 7% of a family's income. According to Child Care Aware of America, no state in the country currently meets that standard for infant center-based care. The national average annual price of childcare reached roughly $13,200 in 2025, up more than 29% since 2020, a pace that has outrun general inflation by several points. In 38 states and Washington, D.C., infant care now costs more than a year of in-state public college tuition, according to the Economic Policy Institute, up from 33 states before the pandemic. CARE.com's 2026 Cost of Care report found that the average parent now spends roughly 20% of household income on childcare alone, nearly triple the federal affordability benchmark, and that 31% of parents are dipping into savings just to keep up. Meanwhile, the supply side is shrinking in places like North Carolina, where 45 licensed childcare programs closed in a single quarter in late 2025. The steepest drop since the early pandemic years. Families are paying more for less, in a market that keeps contracting even as demand holds steady. Number 8 is health insurance that protects rather than threatens a family's finances. The Kaiser Family Foundation's 2025 Employer Health Benefits Survey found the average annual premium for family coverage reached $26,993. The third consecutive year, that figure has risen by 6% or more, a stretch unmatched in 2 decades of KFF tracking. KFF noted, almost in passing, that the average cost of family coverage is now roughly equivalent to the price of a new Toyota Corolla hybrid, a comparison that lands harder the longer you sit with it. Workers themselves now contribute an average of $6,850 a year toward that family premium, and more than a third of covered employees at small firms face a deductible of at least $3,000 before their plan pays for much of anything. The average copay for a specialist visit has climbed to $45, and KFF's own leadership has warned that premiums are likely to rise even faster heading into 2026, driven by drug prices, hospital costs, and the expense of newer medications. For a growing number of households, simply staying insured now competes directly with saving for a home, a car, or a child's education. Number 7 is a college degree that does not define the next 20 years of someone's adult life. The College Board lists average published tuition and fees for the 2025-2026 academic year at roughly $11,950 at public 4-year, in-state schools, and around $45,000 at private nonprofit colleges, with full budgets including housing reaching well past $60,000 a year at some institutions. Total student loan debt in the United States stood at $1.83 trillion as of late 2025, according to Federal Reserve data, spread across more than 42 million borrowers. The average federal balance per borrower reached a record $39,600 by the end of 2025. According to the Department of Education, delinquency has climbed sharply too, with roughly 1 in 4 borrowers with payments due now behind on those payments, a jump that followed the resumption of federal loan collections in 2025. Research from the Federal Reserve has found that every additional $1,000 in student debt measurably delays a young adult's first home purchase, which means the cost of college is no longer contained to college. It follows people into the housing market, into their car buying decisions, and into the years when they might otherwise have started building a family. Number 6 is eating a meal out without treating it as an indulgence. Restaurants used to be where working families went on a Tuesday because nobody felt like cooking. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, prices for food away from home rose 4.1% in 2024 and another 3.8% in 2025, both years outpacing the long-run historical average for the category. The National Restaurant Association's 2026 State of the Industry report found that 40% of consumers say they are already cutting back on how often they eat out, and more than 60% of restaurant operators reported declining customer traffic through 2025. The strange part, captured in consumer research from firms tracking dining behavior, is that most people who are cutting back are not switching to cheaper restaurants. They are staying loyal to the same handful of places and simply going less often, ordering fewer items, or skipping the appetizer that used to be automatic. A category that once symbolized small, frequent pleasure has become something many families now ration on purpose. Number 5 is insuring the home you already own without the bill outpacing the mortgage itself. The Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas found that homeowners' insurance now makes up about 14% of the average monthly mortgage payment, up from 10% in 2013, and that continued premium growth could push an additional 203,000 mortgages into delinquency every year between 2025 and 2055. First Street Foundation, the nonprofit that models climate risk for the insurance industry, projects that premiums will rise by an average of 29.4% nationally over the next 30 years, with 3 of Florida's largest metro areas, including Miami, Jacksonville, and Tampa, facing potential increases well above 200%. Insurtech firm Matic found that the national average premium for a new homeowner's policy reached roughly $1,950 by the end of 2025, an 8.5% jump in a single year, following an 18% surge the year before that. Colorado homeowners purchasing new policies paid on average $666 more in 2025 than in 2024, driven by wildfire exposure and severe convective storms. In Louisiana, the Consumer Federation of America has reported that 30 to 40% of mortgage applications now fail specifically because of high insurance costs. The house itself has not changed. What changed is the price of being allowed to keep it. Number 4 is taking a sick pet to the vet without doing mental math first. Pets have become, by every measure of language and behavior, full members of American households, which makes the next statistic land differently than it would for an ordinary consumer category. According to data compiled by Bank of America Global Research, veterinary service prices rose nearly 6% year over year by April 2026, growing more than 4 times faster than spending on pet food. A Gallup survey conducted with PetSmart Charities found that 52% of American pet owners have skipped or declined recommended veterinary care in the past year. And among those who did, 71% cited cost as the reason, not lack of concern. 3 in 10 pet owners told Gallup that a friend's or family member's pet died in the last 5 years because the family could not afford treatment. Veterinary prices have risen roughly 67% since 2014, according to figures compiled from American Veterinary Medical Association data, far outpacing general inflation over the same period. A trend that researchers link in part to the consolidation of independent veterinary practices into larger corporate ownership groups. Number 3 is a family vacation, the kind that used to be an assumed part of the year rather than a luxury that required a separate savings account. There is no single tidy statistic for this one, but the surrounding evidence tells a consistent story. LendingTree's research found that travel is now among the most common categories parents say they are cutting back on, alongside toys and clothing, as child-rearing costs rise. The same broader inflation pressures driving up restaurants, insurance, and groceries apply with equal force to flights, hotels, and theme parks, categories that, unlike groceries, families can simply choose to skip in a difficult year. For a generation that grew up associating a week at the lake, the beach, or a grandparent's house with the ordinary rhythm of summer, the idea of vacation as optional rather than expected marks a real and largely undiscussed shift in what middle-class life is assumed to include. Number 2 is retiring at a normal age with something resembling financial security. Fidelity's own Q1 2026 retirement analysis found the average 401k balance dipped to $141,000 amid market volatility, down from a record $146,400 at the close of 2025. Those averages, as the firms that publish them are careful to note, are pulled upward by a relatively small number of large balances. The median balance, the number that better describes a typical American worker rather than the wealthiest savers among them, sits dramatically lower, closer to the high tens of thousands of dollars for most age groups. According to Vanguard's annual How America Saves report, the 2025 EBRI Retirement Confidence Survey found that 67% of workers feel at least somewhat confident about funding a comfortable retirement. But confidence and preparedness are not the same thing. And the same survey found inflation and the future of Social Security sitting at the top of nearly everyone's list of worries. For a generation whose grandparents often retired at 62 or 65 with a pension and a paid-off house, the idea of working into one's 70s out of financial necessity, rather than personal preference, has become unremarkable enough that it barely registers as news anymore. Number 1 is the simplest one, and the hardest to put a single statistic on, because it is less a budget line than an inherited expectation. For most of the post-war era, a single average income, often from one earner, could support a family of 4. A mortgage, a car, groceries, the occasional restaurant meal, a week of vacation, and something left in savings. That arrangement is now the exception rather than the rule. A 2-earner household earning the national median family income of roughly $100,000, according to LendingTree's child-rearing analysis, still spends nearly 22% of that income on the basic costs of raising one small child alone, before housing, before a second child, before college. Smart Assets' state-by-state breakdown of the income needed to support a family found wide variation, but nowhere in the country does a single typical income comfortably clear the bar anymore. What has actually disappeared, item by item, across this entire list, is not any single purchase. It is the quiet assumption, held by generations of American parents, that steady work would reliably translate into a stable, improving life, and that the next generation would have it at least as good, if not better. That assumption did not vanish all at once. It eroded the way a coastline erodes, a little at a time, in ways that were each individually explainable and only became undeniable once you stepped back and looked at the whole shape of what was left. None of this means the country has stopped being a place where people build good lives. Families still buy homes, still have children, still take vacations, still grow old with some measure of comfort. But the route there has gotten narrower, longer, and far more dependent on circumstances of geography, timing, and luck than it was for the generation that filled out those kitchen notebooks. If you are a parent right now, the honest question worth sitting with is not whether your children will have it easier than you did. It is which of these 12 things you quietly hope they will still be able to take for granted, and which ones you have already, without saying it out loud, stopped expecting for them. That is not a comfortable question. It is also, increasingly, the only honest one. There is a version of this same list for almost every country in the developed world right now, and the items on it would not look identical, because the pressures driving them are not identical either. The next one worth asking is simple. Which of these forces are uniquely American, tied to this country's particular choices about housing, healthcare, and higher education? And which ones are simply what happens to ordinary life everywhere, once an economy stops being built around the idea that work should be enough?